Hi, this is Sarah Bry, and I am here with Becky Trapnell and Jennifer Straw. Say hello, ladies.
Hello.
Hello.
And we are here with Reader's Workshop number 2.
Welcome. Today we're going to take a little deeper look at Reader's Workshop. We know from our last presentation that we're going to look at both the contents and the container of Reader's Workshop, and that would be our state standards that are based on Common Core, and then the structure that we use within our classroom. So today we're going to focus in, and actually we're going to focus in on a couple of Iwaki's characteristics of effective literacy classrooms specifically, and yet we're going to look at where does Reader's Workshop fit within the bigger picture. When we think of your literacy block, if we now call it an integrated framework, and in that integrated framework, we're going to see 4 parts. The first, the biggest that we're going to talk about is the language workshop. And this model actually comes from Linda Dorn. It would have been created well before Common Core came out, but it is totally an accurate visual for Common Core ELA. So in the language workshop, a teacher is going to do a read aloud or an interactive read aloud in a text that is a couple of levels above the grade level. So this is the text complexity that we hear about in Standard 10 of the Common Core. People in Benchmark are working on text complexity all the time. The language workshop is where the teacher models how to deal with complex text. She's going to think aloud. She's going to make her thinking visible. And kids, through listening and speaking, are going to reflect their comprehension. So attached to the language workshop is the Reader's Workshop, which you know, it's the Reader's Workshop that we've always had, where you will be teaching your on-grade level standards, and kids will be working at their instructional level, and they will be also reading at their independent level. Also attached to the language workshop is the Writer's Workshop. And the content workshop, which would be the science and social studies. So finally, here is the integration of all the disciplines that we've been waiting for. And as we look at this connection, it's all held together and supported by the teacher's ability to scaffold or ensure success with kids. So what prompts, what actions is it that teachers do to pull students forward in their development? So if we take this into the real world, we know that it starts with some kind of common topic or common theme. So let's kind of think of a common topic of change. So if I were thinking about where to begin with this integrated topic of change, it would be in the language workshop, where I would be probably getting a narrative piece that is a couple levels higher than the grade level, where I would be reading about how a character changes over the course of the story. When I move into Reader's Workshop, I would be analyzing pieces of that text and looking specifically at grade, let's say I was grade 3. This is standard 3 actually that we're talking about in reading. But I would make sure that I would be analyzing how and why the character changed over the story. On the grade level standard, kids would be reading at their instructional level, doing the same thing, analyzing how that character changed over the course of the story. And in their independent reading, they would be doing that same standard 3. So while kids, the Reader's Workshop is looking at narrative text, in Writer's Workshop, kids would at the same time now be writing maybe a realistic fiction or a story where the character is going to change over time. When we look into the content areas, there we're also going to be looking at what units would involve change. If I'm in science, maybe it's on life cycles, change over the stages of the course of the life of these critters that you guys get. Or if it was social studies, looking at history, change over time. So we know right now we don't have our curriculum totally looking this way, but at least we have the visual of where we're going and what it's going to look like. Owocki says when she talks about the 9 characteristics of highly effective literacy classrooms, that integration is a big deal, and not to lessen our science and social studies time. It's in those content workshops that she would say that kids have the experience of science or the experience of social studies. I think about the immigration unit in social studies in 3rd grade, how kids experience immigration. And while they're having that experience, in the life cycle of this bush bean in 3rd grade, you all are using the terminology of germination, of embryo, of cotyledon. I probably said it wrong, but kids are experiencing, they're hearing, they're speaking and listening, the academic vocabulary, the domain-specific vocabulary. That's important. And then in the reading, the Science A to Z is an example I bring up often because it is organized around the same topic, but the dots at the top indicate lower level, on level, and higher level text around the same topic. If this is done in your guided reading, you automatically have the guided writing portion. So you see how the reading and writing is planned in conjunction to the science social studies. Now this integration, Owocki says, is a big deal for a number of reasons. Certainly it's the time efficiency that we've been waiting for, but in terms of the experience and then the reading and writing, we know that kids are going to get more adequate focus on vocabulary development than what we've been doing in this piecemealed approach. We know that kids have a better shot in the end of being able to successfully read their content area reading text. And the thing I think that her last reason I like the most is where she's saying, kids aren't just learning to read and write to learn to read and write. They're learning to read and write as tools for learning about this content. Integration is going to give us many, many advantages. Linda Dorn takes it even further. She says the ultimate goal of the integrated workshop is to enable students to generalize their knowledge and strategies for different purposes and across multiple settings. So the setting of your content workshop, your readers workshop, your writers workshop, your language workshop. She says it's the framework that allows teachers to develop the grade level content in whole group and then in the differentiated small groups or one-on-one context. But here's the kicker on the bottom. And finally, to create opportunities for students to transfer their learning to varied contexts. So within our instructional framework, kids are going to have the ability to apply the transfer. Transfer is what has been missing for years. It's one of the big words. Rigor, transfer. Transfer is a big word in Common Core. Another big concept when we go back to Owocki is our explicit instruction. And she talks about how Common Core talks about explicit instruction in whole class, explicit instruction in small group, explicit instruction in one-on-one demonstration. When we were implementing our writers workshop, we talked about instruction kind of like a waterfall, that in whole group, you're going to have this this focus lesson, if it's going to be about revision, let's say, as an example, that would follow from whole group. You'd be doing revision also in small group or guided lessons. Partners would be revising together, and eventually you would be checking a one-on-one, and you would be checking that revision. So it's a one focus that goes across these varied instructional settings. And what is the teacher doing at every level? She's teaching. Okay, so I have to admit, when I had kids do partner work, I just kind of thought my job was kind of to walk around and assess, but nope, it's the ability to walk around, to listen for misconceptions, and to reteach. The one-on-one conference, again, yes, you are assessing, but you are reteaching what those students are going to need. So we know this very well from the writer's workshop. And in fact, a workshop approach is undergirded with what we call this gradual release. And that's how we ensure that all students' needs are met. So you really don't go online and find charts like this that just look at what are the instructional settings in our classrooms. But this was one way that I think we tried to talk about gradual release. But if we look at Fisher and Frey, it was in the 80s actually that they came out with this gradual release, and the first instructional framework only had 3 parts to it. You're going to do a model lesson, you're going to have guided practice, and then kids are going to do this independently. In 2008, they changed it to have the 4 stages so that collaborative learning was involved. So we certainly know these steps and these terms and this language, but they talk about really thinking about your own practice and how close is your practice to what they're describing. Okay, so in 08 here, I loved how they kind of added these terms, and I've walked into classrooms where I've heard teachers say, this is the I do it part, and then it's going to be the we do it, and then you're going to do it together, and then you're going to do it alone. And I even hear kids say, this is the we do it part. So it is a great step that we're using this terminology. But sometimes do you ever find that, you do this model lesson, you do this focus lesson, and then you say, and now this is what you're going to do, and you turn it into a 2-step. Or I know this would be my Friday model when I've thought, man, I've taught cause effect probably 10,000 times. Like, seriously, I've said, this is what you're going to do. This is what you're going to do today. And I skipped three levels. Now, for some kids, it wouldn't be a big deal. But for your lowest kids, it is a big deal. I remember Linda Dorn saying, that in talking to swimmers, and this whole idea that you swim in a normal sized pool, and let's call that you're at level N, and the kid does very well, very successful at level N, but you just take it up one level. It's like taking that swimmer into the Olympic sized pool. They're still swimming. They know how to swim. But because the context got bumped up just a bit, it's like a new arena to them. And so as an adult, we think we've taught this how many times, but when the child has to apply it in the Olympic-sized pool, it feels different to them. So for some kids, this makes a big difference when you take away that scaffold. So a lot of us got good at the focus lesson, the guided instruction, and then the independent. But what they found was that kids didn't have the transfer that they needed. And so they added this collaborative stage where kids were working and doing it together. And what they noticed is that when children moved from hearing language to using language, they came to own that language, to own the meaning, and to learn the concept. And that this collaborative level, having the 4 stages, but adding the collaborative has made a difference for transfer for our students. So, you know, we've come through the years, you know, just kind of, sometimes we talk about the social setting that kids are in. Sometimes we talk about the specific gradual release language and specific structures. So, you know, this was a slide I made years ago, and I called it gradual release. Now, when I look at it today, I say, which of these structures is going to provide the greatest potential for maximizing growth for all students? Is it going to be whole group? Is it going to be the shared reading? Is it going to be literature circles? Is it going to be the collaborative learning? Is it going to be guided reading? We've come to use these terms synonymously. The question is, are they synonymously used? So the first setting, you know, yes, she's in whole group, but when you use the term focused lesson, you're talking about three things. What is the skill or behavior that's going to improve that child's reading? Why is it important, and how does it look? Those are the three questions that give us a 7 to 10 minute focus lesson. You know, when we look at these, the next three pictures, you see Jan Richardson there. You know, we can say they are all small group, but are they of equal purpose? You know, which of those is going to provide a setting of practice? Which of them are going to provide a setting of targeted instruction? And then lastly, the independent. So what Jan Richardson says, when we're talking about guided reading being one of the small group settings, she said guided reading, the three essentials is it's got to be small group, it's got to be instructional level text, and it's got to be targeted teaching. You know, guided instruction, we say has to be in their instructional level, which is their zone or proximal development. For the longest time, I never thought that was such a big deal. I get it today, though, that the zone or proximal development is this blue area. So when you're looking at this is what the child can do on his own, and you see the green ring here that says the student's potential. What this really means is if this child had scaffolding that went, you know, to the right side of this green, that's what the child could accomplish. That's how much more the child could accomplish than what he could do on his own. And as students get this adult scaffolding, that's how they grow the easiest. So this zone of proximal development is where kids can maximize their growth. It's the only place in the gradual release structure. When we say that kids need two things for catch-up growth, they need more instruction and they need targeted, it happens in that guided instruction. That's the only place it happens. So this explicit instruction that Owocki is talking about in whole group, in small group, in one-on-one, we know that in their guided reading, kids are definitely explicitly taught, but they're provided support as they use the skills in real reading and writing. That is critical. That's critical. So we know guided reading is one of the structures of a balanced reading program. It doesn't stand alone, that it is built upon what is first introduced in your whole group instruction, and it becomes then what kids practice on their own. So when Jan Richardson says guided reading is the scaffold between modeling and that's a nice simplified connector. So we look at whole group instruction, and we talk about read alouds is whole group, shared reading. You know, what are we doing primarily in whole group instruction? We're teaching the state standards. And so in a read aloud, we know from our integrated model that that's the model of text complexity. We're going to be reading above, modeling comprehension, reading strategies, motivating reading. Interactive means that we're just going to be using, stopping and engaging the kids in discussion and reflection a bit more, but both of those are above level. The shared reading is always teaching the on level. That's your reader's workshop, the shared reading. Again, looking at the strategies and things that can support readers. We move into guided reading. This is where the teacher can get that specific targeted instruction in small group. This is what we've always known. The small groups are flexible. They're based on student need. They change as learning goals change. And for children, this is where they're in a text that is a tad too hard, so that they really are able to problem solve and practice strategies that are going to help their comprehension. And it's where we use, we assess, we make decisions about that assessment, and we provide the targeted instruction. So our guided reading, the kids are reading, and the teacher observes, listens, questions, prompts, and coaches. And as they interact, kids will learn to apply these skills independently. But Jan gives us tons of support. She tells us what to do, what to say. She provides a structure for us. The last part of the balanced literacy is where kids now on their own are working at their independent level, practicing the standards that you first modeled in whole group. You practice at their level in guided group. And so here they are in self-selected reading or independent reading if it's structured or not structured. So Jan gives us, and we'll include these as handouts when you come in, some charts that are helpful at, this one is on differentiating between what is guided reading and what is literature circles. She gives us an overview of the different settings and the different purposes in balancing our approaches in reading. This sample workshop schedule looks pretty similar to the sisters. The sisters talk about the daily 5. This is definitely the daily 3. For intermediate, I thought this was kind of sweet, where kids would be able to track what they're doing during that reader's workshop, what they're doing when they're in guided. Some days they'll be in guided, but then what are the other things that they're doing when they're not in guided instruction? So to wrap it up in the end here, a couple years ago, we talked about a writer's workshop, and we talked about how, that little pie graph, the 3 different stages, looks simple, but there's a lot of complexity that undergirds that. And really, reader's workshop, you could look at in a similar way. 3 structures, but everything is pretty focused, pretty intentional, and very connected. Thanks.
Thanks, Becky. This was a lot of great information here. Some of it review and some of it new. Some of it had a lot of great takeaways. One thing that stuck with me was integration. And I know that can be a struggle for lots of teachers. Do you think Benchmark will help with that at all?
It's got a very good beginning. Out of the 10 units, 3 of them are social studies topics, 3 of them are science topics, and 3 of them are reading. So Benchmark is going to start us, at least put our foot in the door, much better than we've been as a district in terms of integration.
Sweet. Thank you. When you're finished, please make sure you click on the link for the survey. It is short and sweet, just a couple of quick questions to answer, and thanks for listening.